One of the things that kind of sucks about the camera industry is that every time you buy a camera, not long after, sometimes the next day, sometimes the next week, a new camera will come out. This has happened to me so many times over the years, and after reviewing the S5 Mark II, a lot of people seem to be living with regret that they just purchased an S5 or even a GH6, which is a completely different camera. The evolution of the camera industry is one of those things that changes almost on a monthly or yearly basis. So irrespective of which camera you buy, if you waited for the S5 Mark II, there'll be another iteration of it at some point in the future. And this is the way that the industry goes. If you know the channel, you know I always preach that there's a right and wrong tool for the job. I purchased 4 Panasonic S5s. They weren't free or a gift to the channel or anything like that. I went out and I bought them over the course of about a year or so. Now you might say, hey, am I going to upgrade from the S5 to the S5 Mark II and replace all of my multi-camera setup? No, and I'll explain why. Irrespective of the camera you choose, there's always a compromise. You get the great Sony autofocus at the expense of pretty poor IBIS and really limited video tools and different aspect ratios, but it excels in one way. Panasonic, on the other hand, give you all of these great video tools. They give you a much better IBIS system at the expense of not as great autofocus. Well, up until the S5 Mark II. Kind of brings me to my point. For the kind of shooting I do in a multi-camera setup especially, autofocus isn't important. I always leave my camera set to manual focus. I turn them off, I turn them back on, the manual focus point is in exactly the same spot. So all I have to do is wheel my chair into place and I'm good to go. It's almost like having autofocus in some ways in terms of its simplicity, but the manual focus resume feature is a really handy tool. But you run the risk of never being able to do anything like this when it comes to the original S5 in a studio situation. The autofocus just won't track that well, but I don't feel like I need to replace them with the S5 Mark II because I am using manual focus in the studio, and when I'm shooting in those 8-bit codecs for efficiency at 4K at 25 or 30 frames per second, the image quality will look exactly the same. Furthermore, the latest and greatest camera might not be the right tool for the job. So if I was traveling overseas again in the near future, one thing I wouldn't do is take 2 full frame cameras and lots of full frame lenses. I would take micro four thirds, which is the reason I ended up buying 2 GH5S cameras a couple of months ago, so I can bring much smaller lenses, extremely light cameras with exceptional battery life with me, rather than taking something I'm going to be paranoid about leaving my bag anywhere that I'm not. So sometimes there's the right tool for the job, and then there's the thing that you really want. While the GH5S isn't a perfect camera by any stretch of the imagination, what's improved over the years is the fact I know how to use them far better now than I did in the past, which allows me to get far better results. Rather than just upgrading to the next latest and greatest camera, I'm still able to get excellent results out of the GH5S. I know people that are still shooting on a GH5 getting some of the best image quality on YouTube because they know what they're doing. If you don't fully understand how to get the most out of your current camera, upgrading to the next one won't solve a lot of your problems. This is a sad truth that a lot of people don't speak about. A great example of this is comparing the GH5S up against the Sony FX3. Now on paper they should be vastly different to each other, right? But I was able to get the GH5S to look every bit as good as the Sony FX3, the difference being in the shallow depth of field. So if you know what you're doing, you can make any of these camera systems work. And this isn't to say how great I am at it, it's to say that if you don't already currently understand your system completely and you upgrade, you're still going to have inherently the same amount of problems. Now, if you just purchased the GH6 like a lot of other people, odds are you feel maybe a little bit cheated that phase hybrid autofocus wasn't on the GH6 now that it's finally available on the S5 Mark II. And I don't think anyone really saw this coming. Panasonic have stuck to their guns for far too long. It probably ended up hurting their business because everyone was wondering whether or not the next camera had phase hybrid autofocus. And it was always no, 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 no. Every camera that came out, it had poor quality autofocus when you compare it up against the competition. But buying into the GH6 gives you vastly more advantages than disadvantages. The biggest trade-off, of course, is that it has the DFD autofocus, but the GH6 has the best DFD autofocus that's available, and you can make that work without any problems. And you also get far smaller lenses. So if you're like me and you do any type of travel, look at the difference between micro four thirds and full frame when it comes to the same field of view. This is one of the big advantages to micro four thirds. Look how tiny these little lenses are, and they give you excellent results. At the end of the day, you've got to pick the right camera for the job, and again, enjoy the process with the camera that you already have. Mastering what it is you already are using makes life far more easier anytime you're thinking about upgrading, and it will also put into perspective what you think you're missing. And this is something that I waited far too long to really do in my particular shooting scenario. So for me, whether I'm shooting with the GH5S, an original GH5, a G85, a Sony A7C, Sony FX3, this S5 Mark II, whatever the case may be, they're all going to end up looking very similar at the end of the day. There might be some inherent differences, pros and cons, differences in the shallow depth of field look and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you can get great results out of anything. So don't wait until the next camera all of the time. And also don't feel too disheartened if something else just comes out, because odds are you'll buy a new camera and not long after that, another one will be announced. And then you go through that same entire process and negative thought process as before. So don't let it bother you. Use what you've got, enjoy it. And these incremental upgrades sometimes aren't the be all and end all when it comes to the final product. Thanks for watching.